Hi, it says I'm live. So I'm live. Here I am. But guess what? I'm not live to you, and I'm feeling guilty about it already. So please forgive me. I am 1 hour ahead of you. It is really me. I am in my home. It is Sunday. It is June 7th. I just looked at my computer, so I know that's right. And I'm not making a recording, although I am, but it's live and it will be exactly what I'm saying now. Well, what you see will be what you see in 1 hour, but I need to be somewhere at 3 o'clock on a different Zoom meeting that I couldn't reschedule. So I'm doing it now. So here I am, 1 hour ahead of you, but I'll be with you at 3. I'll post this on time and you can listen. And I'm only an hour ahead of you. And know that the thing that I have to do at 3 is really important to me. And I wasn't able to reschedule it. So, and it keeps me going. So that's what's happening today. Only happens on Sunday. It only happens today and maybe next week, maybe the week after. I don't know, but I'm going to try to switch it those 2 Sundays. So we'll see. But for today, this is Kristen. This is Frankenstein Tea. And you will be watching this at 3. And it is now 2:02 p.m. on Block Island. Hope that's okay with everybody. Welcome. Frankenstein Tea is an afternoon check-in. Check in with yourself, check in with the Island Free Library, and a chance for me to read you a story. And I'm going to start right up today because I have a bit of a story to read. I thought that would be nice on a Sunday afternoon. Maybe you'll listen later in the day. Maybe you'll listen. Maybe this will be a Sunday evening story for you. Maybe this will be a Sunday after dinner story or bedtime story or while you're cooking or after you come in from gardening or mowing your lawn, or I don't know what you're doing today. What are you doing today? I hope you're doing something healthy. I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're tuning in. And I have to say, so this, I'm reading from home today. This is my home. And in the past on Sundays when I read from home, I read from my son's textbook, about 40 short stories. And I remember I was returning library books this week, and this was in my room. This is not a library book. This is something I snagged out of the book sale. I read this woman's novel last year, and it was fabulous. It was a recommendation from one of my coworkers, and I was so grateful to have read it. I raved about this novel. Other people had read it and also raved. So it's, it fits a wide range of people love it. It is called The Marrow Thieves. And so I'm going to say that again. The novel that I raved about and still do and love is called The Marrow Thieves. And I repeat that because I'm not sure I'm going to get her name right. So I think she's Cherie Dimaline. God, I'm so apologetic. Gosh, let's talk about that for a second. I hope I did some justice to the beautiful stories I read this week. Zora Neale Hurston was a mouthful and always difficult for me to read. And then I attempted it out loud. Yesterday, I was speaking Chinese. I've never spoken Chinese. I feel like I should have waited for either my uncle or maybe to talk to my friend Linda Mast about how to say the words I was attempting in Chinese. I read Nigerian this week. I don't know how to speak Nigerian. I attempted that. So just know that I attempt that in full honesty, just to share the stories and the language and to try to do it as much justice as I can, as I possibly can. Okay. This woman, Cherie Dimaline, I'm going to put it close so you can see it. Look at that. I got an autographed copy of one of my new favorite authors from the book sale. Oh, it was like such a treat. And as you all know, I love short stories. This is a book of short stories, autographed. Badass. Look at her. She is badass. She is indigenous to Ontario, I believe. Again, I try to use proper language there. I think indigenous is a good term. She's got some awards back here, but I'm just going to start because it's a little bit of a story. I loved it when I read it. I read this some time ago and again, forgot it was in my room. So I'm going to read it today for you. It's from a collection called A Gentle Habit by Sherry Demeline, published by Kegadance Press in Ontario. Oh, let me give you the date. 2015. And I'll just say hi, Dad, because I think you'll probably tune in. And hi, Mom. Now that my son has left my mother, she's back with me here on this time. Okay, here we go. This short story from a book called The Gentle Habit is called The Bead Fairy. Pearl Harbor hit Sault Ste. Marie like a traveling midway, bringing fresh blood, cheap toys, and the crash and sparkle of a kind of hope that can only be delivered on shiny trucks driven by cigar-chomping toughs. In 1941, this place must have looked like Rockefeller Center on Christmas Eve. Fear of the Nazis brought the Navy, U.S. and Canadian, out in full dress. Anti-aircraft stations were built and manned, and the bars and diners along Main Street rejoiced. Parties were thrown and invitations delivered. Finally, women didn't have to settle for the most height-appropriate boy from their senior class. The Sioux was basking in its shiny moment in time. Then, shortly after the war ended, the military, embarrassed by its reactionary excessiveness, pulled out, leaving behind a tiny base and a skeleton crew. The women who snagged up soldiers breathed a sigh of relief that they were in the right place at the right time as they packed up their trunks and toddlers and waddled away to the next station, their prize husbands leading the way. By 1983, the year I was 8, Sault Ste. Marie was a grain place for steelworkers and their offspring, a fine town to raise a family, far from the dangerous multiculturalism of the city. I was a quiet kid with a mushroom cut and front teeth 2 times the size of the baby teeth around them. I lived with my parents, my older brother, and my maternal grandmother in a bungalow in what was known as the Half-Breed Projects, the neighborhood that crept outward from the hockey arena like a brick scab around a high-sticking wound. For the most part, my life was routine. I took the bus into school where I got good grades, played road hockey with my brother and our friends, and was madly in love with a boy. But not just any boy, Hugh McIvy. Hugh was one of the only white kids in the whole school, the rest of us being bussed in from the reserve or from out by the arena. For sure, he was the only blonde, and he was the tallest kid in the school, even taller than some of the teachers. He stuck out above the rest of us like a dandelion in a field of crabgrass. He was so fair that he shone, and I imagined the air around him affected like the sunny spokes of the Virgin Mary's halo. I searched for the right word to describe him, to adequately capture his beauty in the pages of my diary. I found that word one day while watching cartoons after school. It was early spring and the snow was still crusty on the ground, freezing the gravel bits into peanut brittle like asphalt. I was watching TV in my long johns after running home from the bus stop. My grandmother, who was in charge while my parents were at work, was in the kitchen making chicken noodle soup. I waited patiently on the couch. During the first commercial break, there was an ad for a shampoo that promised to make your hair so silky smooth, so soft and manageable, people would say it was radiant. And there it was, the word radiant. Hugh McIvy was radiant. His godlike status was cemented by the fact that he shared a name with my father, who was the strongest man in the world. I was anxious riding in other people's cars, especially when weaker, less rugged fathers drove them. I knew that in our own car I was safe because even if I got trapped underneath its wreckage, my dad could easily pick up the Ford Fairmont, lift it above his head, and toss it into the ditch like a crumpled up pop can. My school was a rectangular bungalow with a larger building attached like an afterthought, proudly housing our full-size gym. We had an expansive schoolyard with a huge field, a smaller playground full of dangerous-looking metal equipment suitable only for some sort of dark, car- contortionist circus, and a seasonal ice rink. Between the field and the building was a 20-foot swatch of gravel. Every recess, the bell would sound, and hundreds of cooped up, hyperactive, sugar-infused grade schoolers would burst out of the doors like styrofoam balls out of a slit beanbag chair. They would yell and push and scramble their way over to the field, the smaller kids running for the deadly metal playground, the boys scrambling to the rink, dependent on the season. Inevitably, the weakest of the group would be pushed underfoot on the slippery gravel, suffering the kind of evil scrapes that look like they're no big deal, but that hurt for days. By lunch, the nurse's office would have a lineup of pink-kneed patients waiting for her iodine and sharp tongue. In every place, no matter how mundane or leached of imagination, there is a mythology that makes it unique. At my school, we had our own set of traditions and mannerisms. We had a certain way you dressed to indicate where you came from. Res kids wore denim jackets. If a townie came to school in a denim jacket, he had better be prepared to fight for the right to wear it. Only kids in grade 6 or younger wore shorts in the warm months, but the grades 7s and 8s could wear them in the winter. We had a certain manner in which things were done. Grades 3s owned the playground, grade 6s the basketball nets, and grade 8s the rink. But by far, the oddest indicator of our individual existence was what set us apart from any other school in the region, and which could never be adequately explained, were the beads. Without any discernible cause or reasoning, the gravel yard, particularly closer to the building, was infested with beads. They weren't just scattered like breadcrumbs over the gray expanse either, but ground into the dust and stone like technicolor dinosaur bones. And even if you spent the whole day digging at a claimed area, delineated by a finger dragged through the dirt like a shallow fence, even if you were sure you had exhausted every last bead, by the next morning, there would be more to find. No one was quite sure when the beads first showed up. The grade 8s said they had been there since the school opened. They said it was because the contractors built over an ancient Indian burial ground, and at night the corpses would rise and walk the grounds, which was funny to hear since the grade 8s were almost exclusively Ojibwe. They even said it in that spooky horror movie way, like they actually believed their grandparents were zombies roaming the schoolyard at night in tattered breechcloths and raggedy headdresses. The unwritten rules allowed you had to get to grade 2 before being able to spend recess hunched over little patches of gravel, digging around for the multicolored beads mixed into the dirt. Before that, you could approach the circles of the little pig-tailed archaeologists, but you never expected any more to your inquiries than none of your beeswax. After grade 4, working in the bead quarry became foolish, the worry of children. But for those 2 glorious years, one could work in close companionship with their peers, digging for the extraordinary in the ordinary dust of a schoolyard. You felt like Indiana Jones doing that meticulous work. The truth was, we didn't care if we had to sell our own grandparents or follow a strict code of ageist ethics for the beads. The unknown magic was better than the known mediocrity any day. We didn't think we could find that kind of voodoo in our rented homes or around our linoleum kitchen tables. It sure as shit wasn't sitting at the desk next to us eating paste during those dreary afternoons at school that went on forever. We needed the beads. They were like Christmas and summer vacation at once. There were many theories about the bead quarry, and they were the popular topic of discussion while actually carrying out the careful excavation work. One theory, which may have grown from the burial ground story, was that powwow dancers used the school to practice their moves at night, spinning and stomping the beads right off their moccasins. The supporters of this theory searched for proof: a broken thread, a series of softened, high-pressed footprints, anything that could uphold under the scrutiny of the other camps. The other popular origin myth was that the teachers themselves collected beads from the craft stores, and on PA holidays, they walked the perimeter of the building like farmers, dropping seeds to the earth and kicking dirt to cover them up. This way, they were sure to occupy the idle hands and minds of the students. These theorists were spurred on by the odd silence of the faculty over the recess beating. Surely artificial ignorance was a quiet admission of guilt. The last school of thought was by far the smallest, as it relied heavily on the assumed kindness of the 8th graders, the most vile predators known to kidkind. The story went that a secret group of students, like some sort of elementary offshoot of the Freemasons, gathered after school to plant the beads. Altruism in order to carry on the fine, age-old tradition of quarry work. Of course, there were several holes in this theory. The first being the general acerbic nature of 8th graders. Acerbic nature of 8th graders. The second being the likelihood of them staying behind after school, thereby missing their bus, thereby being forced to walk home in the cold night. Also, the grade 8s were insufferable show-offs. How then could they carry off something as clandestine and widespread as the bead quarry without bragging about it? It was an anomaly, not even the theory's supporters could adequately explain. If you were willing to believe the 8th graders were anything other than pimple-necked jerks, you might as well put your faith in the kindergartner's bead fairy idea. She takes your teeth that you put under your pillow and makes beads out of them. Then at night, if the kids are real good, she flies low and drops them onto the ground. She's the most beautiful of all the fairies. That's cause she has to be, to make such beautiful beads for us. Whatever. I spent each and every day at the quarry, weather permitting. In fact, I like to credit myself with the introduction of paintbrushes lifted from the art cupboards as archaeological tools. By the end of afternoon recess, Each digger would have a little pool of unique beads to compare, just enough to fit in the depression of a cupped palm. Single colored beads were more common, candy striped ones more rare. But by far, the prize catch was the oblong glass beads, with holes so tiny one would marvel at the needle that could pass through them, with some suggesting they had to be strung with a single hair. You were lucky to see one of those in any given week. Digging was like fishing. At the end of the day, we would nod our heads at each other's outstretched palms and comment like old men. Nice haul. Yup, sure did get some buttes today. Better luck tomorrow. It's supposed to rain tonight. That usually brings them to the surface. One day in late April, in those heady days when you can literally taste summer vacation in your ham sandwiches and bruised apples, I hit the mother lode. First recess was crisp and sunny and so refreshing. It whet our appetite for the season just around the corner, for those days when you could no longer pretend you were smoking with a stick and frosty breath while waiting for the morning bus. I settled in with my usual group just east of the basketball nets. It was a prime spot since the asphalt curved out into the gravel like a blackened eddy into the ocean. So you had somewhere smooth to sit. Gravel could be hard on a digger's knees and butt cheeks after a while. Right away, the first bead I pulled out of the crushed rock was a peach-hued glass oblong dazzler. I held it up to the sun and basked in the oohs and ahs from the collectors around me. It was definitely my day. In fact, by the end of the first recess, I had a dozen beads in my palm, 5 of them long and clear and so narrow you could slip them into a pierced ear, as demonstrated by my best friend, Natalie Duquette. Bead digging is like gambling. Once you get a taste for winning, that adrenaline-laced shiver of getting something for nothing, you can't wait to go back for more. By lunch hour, I was drumming my fingers on top of my desk and watching the clock. I sped through my sandwich and sucked back my juice box as if it were a respirator. I was the first one out the double doors and waited impatiently for the scream of the bell that signaled lunch recess. When it sounded, I sprang from the school like Astro Boy, straight for the sandy eddy before the sharks could break from other groups and swim in. Lunch proved to be just as fruitful as the morning break, and by afternoon recess, I had attained near legendary status. My collection was varied and colorful, like a handful of shellacked Lucky Charms. Little kids craned their necks to look over my shoulder, and, as per the supported hierarchy, I blocked their view and shot them dirty looks, though I did offer quick peeks when the circle started to break apart at the sound of the first bell. I had never been in possession of an honest-to-God treasure before, so I was unclear on how to proceed. Should I thread them onto a string and wear them? No, that would be too cheesy. Should I gift them to my friends? No, broken up into individual items, the collection lost its grandeur. If there had been a school museum, I would have loaned them for display. I needed to do something magnificent, something befitting such an exquisite find. So I did the most beautiful thing I could think of, pairing together the 2 most stunning images I carried in my head. I gave them to Hugh McIvy. After gym, I made sure I was at the head of the line to walk down the hallway back to class. Rounding the last corner, I took off running, barreling into the classroom before everyone else pushed in. Hugh's desk was at the back of the room, closest to the door, so I had time to scoop the beads out of my jeans pocket and place them in the curved metal lip in his desk, beside his number 2 pencil and an eraser he had bitten in half. Sitting in my desk, breathing heavily, both from sprinting and nerves, I wondered what he would do when he discovered the beads. He had to know it was me. He must have heard about my archaeological skills by now. Even the boys took interest in a great find. I imagined his blue eyes misted over with unshed tears, his delicate features glazed with recognition, like the faces I saw on the cover of my grandmother's Harlequins. He would wait for me after school, just before we got on our respective buses, his uptown, mine down to the arena, and grab my hand in both of his. Thank you, he would whisper, smiling at me from his impressive height. This means so much to me. Then I heard it, Hugh McIvy yelling from the back of the room. Hey, who put this junk in my desk? He said it loudly into the silence of the 28 students watching Mrs. Cochimilio drawing a pie chart on the board. 27 heads turned to see him standing beside his desk, holding out a handful of the most astonishing, shiny beads in the history of St. John Brebeuf Elementary. One head dropped to its desk with a hollow thud while the whispers began. Why, oh why had I been such a show-off? Everyone knew those beads. Everyone knew whose beads those were. There was some shuffling of feet and a nervous cough, but no one said a word, so caught up in the sad, exciting scandal. I didn't claim them. I couldn't. Not even when Hugh walked to the front and positioned his fisted hand over the wastepaper basket. There was a collective gasp, the bead diggers covering their eyes and mouths in disbelief. Then he opened all his fingers at once, letting the most celebrated catch scatter like jeweled rain. My heart shattered and dropped into the bony hollows of my ribcage, like little glass beads hitting the metal sides of a dented wastepaper basket. I lost my love for Hugh McIvy that day. I convinced myself that his pale features were a sign of weakness, like the soft underbelly of an ugly trout, the kind you throw on the rocks straight off the hook because you just know they're too stupid and weak to make their way back to the water on their own. Before school let out that year, I had completely changed my outlook on the subject of his appeal. I decided he had none. I commented at length on the clumsy nature of Goofy and how tall creatures can't be expected to have any grace anyhow. I refused to sit beside him for any reason, whether at the long lunch tables or on the bus during the end of the year field trip to Pioneer Village. And when Mrs. Cochimilio bought a creepy pink-eyed white rat for the class pet, I suggested we name it Hugh. I don't think he really noticed the snubs, having not really noticed me to begin with. But even though I hated him more than my brother, even though I made gagging noises when his name was called at morning attendance, it still stung when he started going out with Melissa Johnson, a pretty redhead who transferred in halfway through the year. Oh, great, I moaned to Natalie when they walked by holding hands at lunch recess. An albino and a ginger. Their children will be practically invisible. I was finished. I quit the quarry cold turkey. I volunteered my recesses, helping out in the kindergarten room, an act that earned me Student of the Year at the June Assembly. I didn't even think of those stupid beads again. Not until grade 6. Not until I caught Rachel Grenier in the act. Rachel Grenier was big, the kind of big that made it hard for her to walk without waddling. Just getting around looked painful. Her deplorable physical state was emphasized on the day the whole gym class had to run laps after a disastrous prank in which several classmates found themselves stuck behind the folding bleachers in the girls' changing room after class ended. I noticed Rachel struggling to put on her woolly tights, desperately trying to yank them over her sweaty brown thighs before Christy and her crew finished in the showers and made their way into the common area to tease the lesser of the group. No one was safe when they were around, especially not the overweight, underweight, bespectacled, those with acne, or God forbid, those whose skin was not milky white. I saw her wince as the tights rubbed over her wide, round wounds slashed across and between her legs. She looked as though she had taken a serious licking with a belt. I wanted to ask her about them, though questions directed at Rachel were usually ignored as a rule. Seeing the way her legs melted into each other as she stood there, I understood that the marks were friction burns from running the track for the past 45 minutes. Rachel paid more than anyone on the track that day, including those crushed up kids who had to be yanked out from behind the bleachers with the homemade wooden hook used to pull stranded balls from the school's roof. Rachel wore old lady sweaters that strained around the buttonholes and thick polyester dresses that made her fat divide itself into rolls. Rachel Grenier had boobies in grade 1. At lunchtime, her Auntie Bev would drop by to deliver lunch. Bev worked at the movie rental place in town, and the store was right beside McDonald's. So Rachel always got a bag with that bright yellow M on the side, the bottom transparent with grease. Then she would sit at her back desk through lunch period, methodically eating her 2 Big Macs, one by one like a robot, with no emotion in her little brown eyes, while the rest of the class nibbled the rind off bologna and cursed under our stinky breath. Bev wore huge tinted glasses that covered half her face and had an Indian afro. She was friends with Mom, and every time we went to rent a movie, I ended up leaning against the glass counter, pondering the new releases while they dished the latest gossip. Through inadvertent eavesdropping, I knew a lot about Rachel's family, which made me feel even worse about the way she was treated at school. Each winter, after the plow had come and pushed all the snow in the cement schoolyard up into the 2-story hills, the bigger kids would lure Rachel over with promises of kindness and friendship. "Hey, Rachel, want to see my new mitts?" She would eye them warily from the small slits of her eyes, her winter coat open since it was too small to stretch over her belly. She didn't really seem to feel the cold anyhow. After a while, she would nudge closer to the kids as they stood in huddles like skidoo jacketed penguins near the bottom of the snow hill, and they'd include her in their conversation. "Hey, Rach, do you watch Scooby-Doo yesterday? Wasn't that funny when Shaggy got stuck in the freezer? Ha! I bet he was farting ice cubes after that." Then, just when Rachel was lulled into camaraderie, when she was drunk on this human contact, after long droughts of complete imposed social leprosy, they would pounce, wrapping their wool scarves around her wide polyester torso. She would struggle but never scream as they tied knots and joked about her size. "Jesus Christ," Ted Robinson would yell. "How do you even fit this arse on the toilet, lady?" Everyone would laugh, slipping on the flattened snow around their victim as they tied her up securely, as if she would run away, as if she could run away. Then, hoisting their prey like a submissive pig on a spit, they would start up the side of the snowy hill. It took about 8 of them, all older, mostly boys from the grade 7 and grade 8 classes. At the top, they would stand her straight, still bound and mute. Always secretly thought that Rachel took it like a champ. I watched from the top of the ice slick monkey bars where I'd spend recesses, turning quick somersaults with Natalie. Rachel would stand there waiting, her eyes fixed on something far above the roof of the school, beyond the Elmer the Safety Elephant flag that snapped on the flagpole. It reminded me of those movies where prisoners were blindfolded and tied to a pole in the middle of a foreign yard, given a cigarette. For the longest time, this is what I thought was meant by that slogan, smoking kills, and then shot to death. Sooner or later, one of Rachel's captors would let loose a strained and triumphant battle cry, issuing a warning to the smaller kids playing in the foothills below. It was a cry the kids were all familiar with, and the games would stop in mid-play, pucks gliding effortlessly into open nets. Then, when every kid below was silently watching, shading their eyes from the winter sun with snow-crusted mittens, they would push her. Once balance was lost and she tipped over that first ledge, she would begin to bounce. Then, like an obscene pumpkin in hand-me-down sneakers and scratchy nylons, she would roll. You couldn't help but stare. She would literally catch air on the way down, picking up speed until her face and hair blurred into one brown smudge. By the time she got to the bottom, none of the spectators were even sure she was still alive. She always was. She would stand up and just walk away while the whole schoolyard howled with laughter. She wouldn't shout or turn to look back at her attackers. Not once did she tell on anyone to the yard teacher. Not once were there any repercussions. She would just waddle away in her wet, open coat. Early one spring, Rachel didn't show up for class. Miss Simpson told everyone to quiet down. It was explained that Rachel's dad had died. They heard later that he had in fact committed suicide. I heard the full story from Mom, who heard it while returning the Goonies movie to Bev's store. Oh, my poor sister, Bev moaned, leaning over the counter conspiratorially and looking over the plastic rim of her glasses. I mean, they were breaking up for sure, but holy jeez, what a blow that was. She really did love him. 2 of her kids were even his. I found out it had been Rachel and her 2 little brothers who had found their father, recently laid off and newly separated, swinging from a crooked tree in their backyard. Mrs. Grenier thinks it would be nice if Rachel's friends would show up to the funeral, said Miss Simpson, arching her pencil-darkened eyebrows, arms akimbo at the front of the classroom. Miss Simpson had a way of getting right in your face without moving or even really raising her voice. And of course, since we are all friends in this class, I am sure that you will all show up to support Rachel in her need of time. Each student looked down at their hands. I already knew I had to go. As soon as my mom had found out about Rachel's dad, she went to the department store and bought a new black dress with a high, itchy collar. The next day, she pulled me inside from an intense game of street hockey, stripped off my patched-up jeans and worn Dynakid runners, and slapped that dress on me. Then my tangly hair was brushed. I caught a slap to the back of the head, pulling away from the comb that yanked at my sweaty bangs. Mom shined up my scuffed dress shoes that I was forced to put on, even though they pinched my toes. My dad drove out to the church on the edge of the city and ushered me across the parking lot. It was slushy outside, and my sore feet got wet walking through the dirt parking lot. He pushed me inside and then left again to wait in the car and listen to the Leafs game on the radio. Bev met me at the door, and I saw myself reflected in her huge dark glasses, a miserable little girl in wet shoes. She put a hand on the top of my head and smiled. I'm so glad you came. Rachel is lucky to have such nice friends. Guilt made my skin warm, and I squirmed inside my good coat. The pews were half filled with sad looking people, all in dark clothes, some wearing baseball caps and others in hand me down suit jackets, several wearing both at the same time. The sound of snowmobiles rolling up to the church punctuated the silence now and then as family members made their way in from the reserve. They ambled into the church wearing camouflage snowsuits, pulling off stiff gloves, and stomping snow from heavy boots. A few kids from class had been brought by their parents, mostly other half-breeds who lived in town, like me. We looked shyly at each other, embarrassed to be dressed up like this, and mostly embarrassed to be faking friendship in front of Rachel's whole family. Rachel herself didn't look at anyone through the entire service. I was ashamed of this, but I also felt kind of ripped off since my big sacrificial trip went unnoticed by the very person it was meant to benefit. She just sat in the front row, wedged in between her tiny mother and her scrawny brother like a tomato on a shish kebab. Rachel came back to school a week later. She was still big, though now her cheeks had a sunken look to them. She stared at that far-off spot over the school's roof, past the flagpole, more often. Sometimes she would spend a whole recess standing in the middle of the yard, looking off at that spot, her open coat blowing around her like a cape. The next winter, after the plow came, the kids found a different outsider to lure over, a pale runt with huge teeth they nicknamed the Beeve. He would wail with his insanely high-pitched scream all the way down the snow hill, throwing his arms out to his sides, spinning them around like skinny windmills. The Beeve would tumble and scream all the way to the bottom, collapsing in a heap of vinyl snow pants and pink exposed skin as his matching jacket was pushed up over his concave belly. Landed, he would lie there for the remainder of recess, safe in his defeat. Rachel was the only kid on the playground who didn't respond to the warning cry that was issued from the top of the hill, announcing the descent of this newest victim. I watched her sometimes from the top of the icy monkey bars as she stood there with her back to the spectacle. She was no longer involved in the ritual. There was no point anymore in dragging Rachel to the top to push her down again. She was already at the bottom. I imagined my volunteerism and extracurricular activities at St. John Brebeuf in the post-quarry days made me exceptional, but in a more honest and mundane way than the great catch had years ago. I envisioned scholarships named in my honor and students being reprimanded with me held as the standard. Why can't you be more like Rose? Hopefully, there would be a framed picture of me with my Student of the Year award somewhere nearby that could be pointed to. It was these vain notions that kept me late one night as an active member of the Teacher-Student Council, helping to plan a redesign of the gymnasium to include a full theatrical stage. Well, realistically, my part was narrowed down to reporting on how many chocolate bars I estimated we would be able to sell this year in our fundraising drive, but it was still pretty important. I walked out the back door into the purple evening, the air stuck in that in-between time when night was still baking from the heat of the sun. It was spring and the gravel had more of a crunch than usual now that it had thawed. I shoved my hands into the pockets of my windbreaker and walked towards the side field that bordered the parking area. I thought I saw the Fairmont beside Mrs. Bruckner's Jeep. Ah, poor lisping, mincing Mr. Bruckner, the drama teacher, with his wife and two spoiled kids. As if a wife, kids, and a rugged Jeep were good enough covers. I was in grade 6, and I saw right through it and wasn't even sure what being gay meant. I was thinking about Mr. Bruckner's performance at the school track day when he was forced to run a foot race with the rest of the staff. He looked like my dog paddling and pushing out her neck when I held her over water, when I caught movement from the corner of my eye. Nervous now in the semi-dark, I turned towards the playground where the asphalt shore met the gravel sea. Rachel Grenier looked back at me, her small, wet eyes like two black buttons gathering folds in her wide face. In her left hand was a margarine container with no lid, held steady against one heavy tit. She looked like a sad little farmer in a misguided tract. Her eyes held my stare. There was not even a possibility that she was going to say anything. Her mouth was so firmly closed, not an expression to be deciphered on her face or pulled out of her muted body language. Very slowly, she extended the fingers on her right hand and, still looking straight into my eye, tilted it towards the ground. A stream of beads rolled down her thick fingers, glittering in the cold dusk like diamonds off a broken chain. Striped dazzlers, glass cylinders, blood-red seeds. They tumbled to the ground, nestling among the gray chalk of sneaker-stomped gravel. They were warm dreams on a cold night, buoys strewn across a boiling sea, and tomorrow they would be someone's brand new legend. I got that good feeling in my guts, that nudge of magic and possibility in my throat, the sweep of hopeful feathers in my soul. I wanted to drop to my knees right then and start grabbing them up, shoving slippery handfuls into my windbreaker pockets. But my time was done. Still, I couldn't believe it. I could never be sure how the task was handed down or who was the first, and I knew that I would never know. After all, questions directed at Rachel were usually ignored as a rule. But here we were, Rachel Grenier, the kid everyone hated, the kid who was beat up and put down, not because she was fat, but because she was indifferent to the taunts. Rachel Grenier, whose dad hung himself from the same tree where she and her brothers built a tree fort with milk crates and duct tape. Rachel Grenier was the goddamn bead fairy. I didn't realize I was crying until the snot hit my top lip. I wiped it off on my sleeve. Then my dad blew his horn and I turned away, leaving her to her work under the purple sky. Soon enough, the moon would glow like a silent timer, and she would begin the long walk home. That was The Bead Fairy from A Gentle Habit by Cherie Demeline. Thanks for coming to Frankenstein Tea. I'll see you tomorrow, and it will be at 3:00. Have a great afternoon. I'll see everybody soon. Peace.